Awesome. Well, welcome everyone to this webinar today. I'm Lauren Valier, and I'll pass it over for the introduction to my co-host here. But today's webinar is on protect, fund, and grow IP and shred strategies for scaling companies. So we're hoping to give you a really valuable webinar today, and lots of useful tips for you folks, and lots of time for Q&A at the end as well. So as I mentioned, I'm Lauren Valier. I'm the co-founder and managing partner of GrowWise, and I'll pass it over for the next introduction here.
Hey everyone, thank you all for joining in. It's a pleasure to connect. And my name is Nalay, and I'm the CEO of Innovance IP Solutions. All right, Lauren, do you want to take over?
Yeah, sounds
Talk a little
good.
bit about Shred.
Yeah, so we're going to kind of kick things off with Shred, go back to IP, and then talk a little bit about both and kind of how we can use them to scale and grow and some strategies around them. So I'm going to kick things off by a bit of a 101 on Shred. So Shred, for those that don't know, stands for Scientific Research and Experimental Development, and it's a tax incentive program in Canada. I'm going to do a quick poll here just to gauge the room and see how familiar people are with Shred. So let's launch this. There should be a poll popping up on your screens here. If you guys could just fill out the answers here, and I'll just gauge where folks are at and where to start here in terms of Shred 101, or if we've got a lot of experts in the room.
Hmm.
I'll just give it another second here. If everyone on the call could just put a quick response in the chat here or in the poll here. Alrighty, so seeing that most have never filed before, but a few currently filing, a few filed previously, so a little bit of mix of everything. Good to see. Awesome. Thanks for participating in that, everyone. Perfect. Okay, awesome. So I'm going to start at a bit of a Shred 101. If you're more experienced or know a little bit about Shred, feel free to just tune out and we can I'll rope you back in when it's time to talk about the growth and the strategies and everything. So a little bit more about Shred. Shred is Canada's largest tax credit. It's over $4 billion annually, distributed by both the federal and provincial level governments in Canada. So it's a cash refund that refunds up to two-thirds of eligible R&D costs. Excuse me. The goal of the SHRED program is to fund innovation and technical problem solving in Canada. So I'll explain a little bit more about what that means, but it really is designed to fuel innovation and problem solving. And how it works is it's an after the fact refund. So you have your expenses going out the door throughout the year. At the end of the year, you apply for SHRED with your business taxes and you get a refund. And eligible expenses include salaries, contractors, and material costs. So that's the highest level overview of SHRED. So who's eligible? Basically, for SHRED, everything has to happen within Canada. All the work must take place in Canada, the companies must be incorporated in Canada, any contractors need to be located in Canada, and any material providers need to be Canadian as well. And as I mentioned, you need to be spending money. A lot of times companies will ask, we're doing all this great work and it's definitely SHRED eligible, but if you're at the stage where you're not yet paying your team members a salary, then there's no expenses to be reimbursed through SHRED. Or if you're not paying contractors or you don't have material costs, there's no expenses yet to be reimbursed. So you do have to be having that flow of expenses. And typically, it's in the scale of kind of tens of thousands rather than a few hundred or thousands here. It needs to be pretty significant expenses in order to add up in your SHRED return. Anyone can apply for SHRED, any industry, tech, pharma, manufacturing are the largest, but truly any industry, anyone that's innovating and solving technical problems. And that leads me to that last point of the work must aim to solve a specific technical challenge. So a lot of times businesses will ask, okay, my business is doing this great innovative thing. But if on the day-to-day level of what you're doing, kind of on the day-to-day level of your team members or your contractors, that work, that really detailed work needs to be aiming to address a technical problem. So it's not about the business challenges, it's about the specific technical challenges the company is facing. So, a bit more on what work qualifies. So, the work must create or improve products, processes, or technologies. It must be experimental and systematic. As I mentioned, technical problems, not business problems. And all that's to say, what we kind of say at GrowWise is SHRED funds the struggle. There has to be a clear area of uncertainty where you try, you iterate, and you experiment to address that specific technical challenge and improve or create a new product, process, or technology. So that work really needs to be iterative and it needs to be that kind of struggle of it's not a clear-cut solution. You're not following existing steps. You're not doing what someone else has done before. You're solving a new challenge, and that requires that struggle, that iterative process. So in terms of what expenses qualify, some of this is changing with some new updates that the government just released, which we'll get into in a little bit. But up until this point, expenses that qualify for SR&ED are salaries for technical employees. So think developers, engineers, designers, those sort of technical employees. And two-thirds, 66% of their salaries can be refunded through SR&ED. So if you're paying a developer $100,000 and they're exclusively focused on the technical problem solving, they're not debugging or doing UI, UX, doing those basic things, they're doing technical problems, then $66,000 could be refunded at the end of the year through SR&ED. So it's extremely lucrative, but it really is for those expenses that specifically qualify for the program. Same goes for contractors or consultants. If you're paying a third party to do that technical work for you, they have to be in Canada. You can receive 35% of that expense reimbursed through SR&ED. And the last is materials used or consumed in testing. So what that means is server costs, subscriptions, any of those things, that's not eligible. What the CRA means by this is materials used and transformed in testing. So this most typically applies to manufacturing companies that are using consumable materials like chemicals or lumber, those sorts of consumable materials, and they're used up in testing and wasted at the end of the process. So anytime you're having a material physically be consumed in a test, that is kind of what the CRA considers as a material expense. So I've got a couple of examples of eligible work here. I've seen 1,000,001 examples of eligible SR&ED work. This is just to get a kind of sense of detail within a SR&ED project. So within a SR&ED application, there's going to be typically multiple different projects within one company's application. And those projects are divided by the specific technical challenge. So some of those technical challenges might be addressing security challenges while building a custom software, improving algorithms to process complex data sets in a new way, building and refining prototypes to evaluate technical feasibility at scale, designing custom hardware or devices to solve challenges existing tools can't handle. And you'll notice three common things amongst these problems is there's a clear technical challenge, there's an iterative problem solving, and there's lessons learned. And that's really what the CRA needs to see is those three chunks, and that the iterative problem solving required that uncertainty and that unclear process. You have to try something, learn from it, pivot, try something else, test variables, and really go through that problem solving process. That's what they want to see. Alrighty, so a little bit more about the timelines and deadlines of SR&ED. So as I mentioned, SR&ED happens throughout the year. Companies are doing their projects. They've got expenses flowing out the door. They're paying team members or contractors, have material expenses. And those projects need to be documented throughout the whole year. The CRA is relatively flexible in the documentation that formats that they'll allow, but the core questions that need to be answered is the three I just mentioned. What was the technical uncertainty? What did you do to address that technical uncertainty, and what lessons did you learn? So all three of those pieces of information need to be documented somewhere within your process. I always say the documentation that is sustainable is the one that you should do. If you build this amazing process for documenting and it lasts a month, that's much worse than doing, fairly strong documentation that's sustainable throughout the year. So as mentioned, documenting throughout the year. At the end of your fiscal year, that's when you prepare your SR&ED claim. You submit it to your accountant with your business taxes. That step is kind of where we come in. So we work with our clients to prepare their SR&ED claims, combine all of the data they've created and documented throughout the year, identify the projects and create the SR&ED claim, and then submit it to the accountant for compilation into their tax return. You file SR&ED, there is an 18-month deadline. So if you've missed SR&ED for a previous year, you have up to 18 months after that fiscal year ends to actually still apply for SR&ED and amend your tax return and submit SR&ED. So at this point, it's not too late to apply for SR&ED for fiscal years that ended in the summer of 2024. But we're really coming up to that deadline here. So if you're, June 30th deadline, for example, June 30th year end, You can still apply for the year that ended in 2024 now. But the best thing to do is apply for SR&ED with your business taxes every year when you file taxes consistently. Don't wait. You do it every year, kind of with your taxes, and just have a clean process. And then the CRA typically takes 2 to 5 months to issue that refund. And that's when you get that cash refund in your bank. And so it is a cash refund as long as you're incorporated and meet a few other requirements. But typically, it is a cash refund that's issued right into your bank account within 2 to 5 months of the CRA reviewing that application.
All
Yeah,
right.
I'll pass it over to you for some IP stuff now.
All right. No, thank you. Thanks, Lauren. So it's pretty fascinating to see a lot of things that I learned as well on the shared side as well. But let's talk about intellectual property because there's one thing that there's certain things which are common. If you're spending money on R&D, you're likely generating some intellectual property as well. Okay, and just like Lauren did, inspired by her, I'm going to run a poll as well. Lauren, could you help me launch the poll?
Yeah, for sure. I'll put that up now.
I would like to understand a little bit about your approach to managing IP in your company or your startup. How are you managing intellectual property? Okay, there's a good mix here, it seems like.
Hmm.
I think that's consistent with your poll results as well, right?
Yeah.
We have some companies who do not yet have a formal IP strategy. There are quite a few who are looking to file in the next 6 to 12 months. There are some who are actively filing, and there are some which are actively filing in-house, and there are some within actively filing with the council. That's great. It's good to know that uh, the kind of progress, because this kind of helps me understand and you know cater the presentation a little bit as well. That tells me how much time I should spend on just some basics of IP. So to my understanding, it seems like a lot of people understand the basic concepts of IP, so I'm not going to spend too much time on that. But here's, just a quick overview of different IP regimes. IP, or intellectual property, this is a definition from World Intellectual Property Office, WIPO. IP refers to creations of the mind, such as literary and artistic words, symbols, names, and images used in commerce, designs, and inventions. Now, each of these words refer to a particular type of IP protection. So literary and artistic works are typically covered under copyright protections. The symbols, names, and images used in commerce are covered under trademarks. The designs are design patents, and inventions could either be trade secrets or utility patents. So that is, together they form, the different types of intellectual property that you might have. I'll go through them very quickly to just kind of give you an overview. But to start off, we're going to start off with copyrights. So copyrights are, they give the author of an original creative work an exclusive right for a certain period of time for that work. Now, copyrights are strictly related to the expression of your intellect or expression of your creativity. If you are drawing a picture of a device, it does not cover the device itself. You get the copyright only for that picture. So similarly, if you write a code, a software code, for a particular mechanism or for a particular way of doing things, only that code is protected, not the concept that you're coding within that code. So you've got to be careful and understand what's copyright, what is covered in copyright, and what is covered in patents, especially when it comes to software. But anything like written words or code is copyrighted. Your music sheets, your written music, that's copyrights. Any dramatic expression of arts, videos, audios, all of those, and your artistic creations as well. The next is trademarks. Trademarks claim the ownership of unique identity with which you are participating in trade or commercialization or commerce. So this is more about focusing on the identity of you as a company or you as an individual and what describes you. And a great example for this is McDonald's. as soon as we see the golden arches, we recognize, it's McDonald's. So the logo is, part of their unique identity. So is their slogan of "I'm loving it," or the word mark of McDonald's word itself. All of these are trademarks, and again, it could be a word, but in many cases, sometimes it could be something more than that. Like for example, if you've seen James Bond movies, for example, the roar of the lion at the beginning of any MGM movie, that is a trademark for MGM. So it doesn't have to be just a word mark or a logo. It could be anything that identifies you or your brand uniquely. So that's a trademark. Designs are basically the ornamental design and aesthetic aspects of a functional item. So typically, if you think about this bottle, you know right away again that this is a Coke bottle without Coca-Cola written anywhere. That's a design patent that they own. Similarly, if you're looking at the iPhone, the shape and design, all of those are design registrations. The key thing about design is again, you want to make sure that the designs just cover the ornamental design and aesthetic aspects. They do not cover the underlying functionality. Okay, so you can design the Captain America shield. It does not necessarily cover the powers that the shield has. And finally, we come to patents. Again, a patent is, one of the most talked about, or IP forms. It is a right or title for a set period of time for the sole right to exclude others from making or using that particular invention. Okay. There are a few criterias for patenting. Not everything could be patented. For example, a lot of times, business ideas cannot be patented. And just like Lauren was mentioning that you have to solve a technical problem for it to be shred eligible, to get a patent, it should solve a technical problem as well. Okay, and the utility aspect, which is whether or not your invention solves a technical problem, that's a big part of patentability. The second is it non-obvious for a person who's aware of that, reasonably aware of that field, can they determine what you've done? And finally, are you the first one? Or is it novel? Has anyone done this before? And I have a very unique example of a patent here. This, the image that you see here is that of a actual granted patent called the beer umbrella. Now, if you think about it, it's an umbrella to protect your beer bottle. Umbrellas have existed before. The harness that connects with the beer bottle, that exists before. You know, umbrellas for cocktail drinks, they have existed before. So you might think that, okay, a lot of the things here are not protectable. But the combination of these things in order to protect the beverage and in a way where you could carry it's functional, you can take it around, that is the technical problem apparently that they're solving. Okay, that's the claim that they actually made on this patent application, and it was granted in early 2000s. So often we think that it has to be something earth shattering or something like completely novel to come up with a patent, but the fact is most patents are actually a combination of things that we already know, but they are put together in a unique way to solve a unique or technical problem. So that's generally about IP. I would like to pass it back to you, Lauren, to talk a little bit about Shred strategy. If you're a company, how should you deploy Shred for your growth? Over to you.
Sorry, I was muted there. Awesome. Thanks for the overview of IP. That's super, super interesting. I love the beer umbrella. It's such a fun idea. It's good to understand the difference between all these different things and really how to protect yourself. So I know you're going to get into a couple more strategies after this, but it's a great, great overview. So a bit more on Shred strategy for growth. There's a lot of things that people do or don't do that can really change the overall size of your Shred refund and also how defensible it is. I didn't mention this earlier, but there's a process for Shred claims, and about 90% of Shred claims pass through the CRA without any further questioning, without any further scrutinization. But in about 5 to 10% of cases, what happens is what's called a Shred audit or Shred review. And what that means is that the CRA digs in a little deeper. I'm sure, many people on the call today have heard a horror story of a Shred audit before. They can be quite horrible if you aren't prepared and if you don't have the correct documentation to justify what work you did or what challenges you faced. So, um, as I mentioned, 90% of the time, you pass through without that investigation, but in about a 10%, 5 to 10% of times it happens and there's no real known, there's some known triggers, but in a lot of times it just every few years it happens. So there's a lot of strategies you can put in place to make sure that process goes smoother and it's just a simple audit and done. So we'll get into some of that now. Awesome. So in terms of maximizing your shred, we want to make sure kind of four key questions are answered. So first of all, project identification. We want to be clear on who is identifying the projects as shred eligible and when in the process that happens. So if you're a small company, three, two, three, four people, everyone knows what everyone else does. There's no lack of visibility. There's no, the person at the top knows what shred is, but the people doing the work don't. But as soon as the company starts to get larger, 5, 10, 15 plus 100 plus people in the company, if only the top executives are aware of shred and know about what is and isn't eligible, but the developers, engineers, designers that are actually doing the shred work don't know about those, requirements, then there's going to be miscommunications and it's going to be honestly a disaster when it comes time to identifying who figures out which projects are and aren't shred eligible, when that happens. And basically, this leads me into my second point, which is that you want to identify shred as soon as possible. Because as soon as you identify that something is eligible for shred, you can start documenting and time tracking correctly. If you don't have the process in place to identify it, you're going to be trying to backtrack and figure out what someone did or how much time someone spent on that project going back into the past. So that leads into the second point, which is time tracking. For shred, as I mentioned, you need to be able to answer those three questions. What was the challenge? What was the uncertainty? What was the, work done to address that challenge and what did you learn? You need to be able to prove who spent what time doing which of those activities. So in a perfect world, the CRA would love to see time tracking on a daily basis saying, John spent 5 hours on this exact task within this project, 2 hours doing this, which is unrelated to shred, and a bit of time on that project, which is another shred project who's doing this. So that's the ideal level of detail. We always say, that's pretty unfeasible, but if you could do it, that's amazing. In a perfect, kind of not in a perfect, but in a sustainable world, what typically happens is on a weekly or bi-weekly basis, we have employees go back and take 5 or 10 minutes at the end of the week and just say on a weekly level, what percentage of my time was I working on which project? If, of this week, I spent 50% of my time on this project, and that included these key four tasks. The next 30% was on this project, these few tasks, and the remaining 20% was on meetings or admin work. So having that level of detail will really substantiate your shred claim and be able to prove at the end of the year that, yes, indeed, so and so John spent 40% of his time throughout the whole year on this project. You'll be able to really accurately show that you're not just pulling that out of thin air. That's coming from true data that you've collected throughout the whole year, which is really what the CRA wants to see. Another strategy around shred, as I mentioned, there's a big difference in the refund size between employees and contractors. So, employees, you get two-thirds of their salary back, 65%-ish. For contractors, it's around 35 to 40%. So, it's nearly double the refund for employees versus contractors. There's a lot of legal implications, and I know there's a lot of, in general, factors in that equation of whether to hire someone as an employee or a contractor, especially for early days companies. But it's important to know that shred should be part of that equation. If you're paying someone a certain amount every year and they're consistently working for you and consistently doing these jobs, there's legal implications to assuming that they're a contractor as well. So it's always good to, clarify with a lawyer as well. But from a shred perspective, you really want to see that you really want to understand that you could be getting significantly more if they're an employee versus a contractor. And then the last is about shred efficiency. So we often see companies trying to apply for shred internally or using a really outdated manual consulting practice that requires tens and tens of hours to, execute that shred claim and assess the projects, review everything. Whether you're doing that in-house or with a manual consultant, just ask yourself, is this the best use of your time? What we've tried to do at GrowWise is really simplify that process. We've built an AI-driven platform that expedites the process of applying to Shred. So just before you go into the, thought process of what your strategy is going to be, just understand what matters to you, whether it's time, cost, price, those are the same thing, but you know what I mean? There's a couple different factors you want to think about and just, ask yourself if this is the best use of your time. I wanted to go over a quick example shred situation. So, a lot of companies we talk to are right at that investment stage or just about to get investment. And I wanted to kind of talk about what that can look like from a shred perspective. So, let's say you got $1 million in investment, and that allows you to then hire two new technical employees, paid $100,000 each, $200,000 a year total, pretty reasonable salaries for developers or engineers. In that first year alone, if those two employees are working on shred eligible technical projects, you're going to receive $132,000 back through shred as a refund. For that $200,000 investment, that basically becomes $330,000 of spendable money with shred. So over 5 years, $1 million in salary translates to $660,000 covered by Shred, which only then costs you $340,000 total for two employees for 5 years. So it really does allow investments to go further and allow for further cash flow, allow for further use of those funds and just investors really want to see you doing programs like this and using their investment money in this sort of way. A little bit more on that because I know a lot of times companies right at this stage that are looking into shred, looking into IP are also looking into VCs and VC funding. So just a couple key things. Maximizing your shred claim is really important and filing every year on time. So investors don't want to see, you're going back 18 months and if you have to do that once to then get up to speed, that's one thing. But if every year you're delaying and offsetting your shred and pushing it back and then amending your tax return 6 months, 8 months, a year down the road, that's really inconsistent cash flow for your business. So the best procedure there is just filing every year with your business taxes on time and not delaying. And know your non-dilutive cash flow forecast. If you are applying to shred, or even if you aren't yet, what you need to know is before you have any conversation with an investor, how much you are planning to get back from Shred, what that timeline looks like, how you're planning to use their cash to then, expand your Shred programming, or if you are going to use that funding for further development or research, how that's going to impact your Shred, what, you can expect from your cash flow, non-dilutive cash flow forecast for the next X years. So understand even if you're not yet applying to Shred or not yet eligible, what that looks like kind of at least a year or two down the road. VCs also like to see that you're working with a consultant so that you can focus on your business and not on paperwork. Some companies do choose to file internally. That typically does take between 50 to 100 hours, depending on how unorganized you are, man hours, among your company to figure that out. So it's not the best use of your time. It's like doing your own taxes. If it's simple, you can, but it's not the best use of your time. And they want to see that you've explored every option, like Shred, IRAP, MyTax, any provincial grants. I know there's IP grants that Nile is going to talk about in a minute here. So, really just wanting to see that you're exploring all of these non-dilutive funding options. And if you're not eligible, you should know why. So a little bit, as I mentioned, a little bit on the Shred budget updates. So there was quite exciting news announced in the federal budget just a couple weeks ago now, with lots of exciting updates and in general some Shred updates. So in general, most of these have implications for larger scale ups with significant shred expenses, but there are a few that apply to some of the smaller companies. So, for example, the enhanced refundable credit limit increased to 6 million. That's for significantly large companies that have multi-million dollars of shred expenses. Same applies for the larger taxable capital range for enhanced eligibility rate, and refundable credits expand to include eligible public corporations. All of those apply to very large companies that are having the multi-million dollar shred claims. So I don't think anyone on this call is in that boat yet, but hopefully one day. And it's exciting to know that the shred program does support that kind of range of business of scale up into public corporations. The one thing that might matter for smaller companies is the introduction of a pre-claim approval process. There might be potential to basically apply for shred the same way you would with IRAP or another grant and get pre-approval and then know that you're eligible before you actually go and spend that money. So we've yet to hear about the details of this. As I mentioned, it was just like a week or two ago that they mentioned this, but this could be an exciting opportunity for startups, and we're really going to monitor what that means. So we'll be definitely tuned into everything they announce about what that process looks like and how it ends up benefiting the smaller companies. And Nili, I know there is some updates on the Shred side relating to IP. Did you want to speak to that a little bit?
Sure. I mean, I, I guess we can go on record because I heard one of the deputy ministers going on record about this, a couple of days back. But IP expenses will now also be shared eligible according to the new budget. Uh, in the new budget or the fall economic update, they actually announced the productivity super reduction for shred, and IP expenses are apparently going to be part of that. Now, the details of this are right now still very high level.
Hmm.
The actual text hasn't come out yet. I mean, we have the text of the budget, but that's high level budget. But the granular details about how that impacts the shed document, like shed filings and such, um, hasn't been announced. So probably once that is released, we'll get more insights into this. There are some other changes about capital expenses being shred eligible as well. But again, the details are still very
Yeah.
ambiguous at this point.
It's all
They're not.
it's really exciting news, but we don't really know the details yet. So
Yeah.
definitely kind of the point of this slide is like stay tuned and we'll be providing
Yes.
updates to our contacts and to everyone in this call as well, kind of as we hear them. So exciting stuff coming, but details are still very nuanced at this point.
Yes, yes. And again, I mean, everyone is still sifting through the details of the
Yeah.
budget. And again, the budget is very high level document, but then if you go into details of every single program,
Mhm.
it's still a lot of information there.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So, thanks for sharing, some of the things about shared strategy because it is really important. And, when you're doing something like this, and I've done, shared for some of the companies that I've been involved with, and it is a it seems easy, but is a lot of work, and there's a little bit of art to doing this. So you gotta have an expert kind
Yeah.
of, help out on that. And I can truly understand that. And some of these strategies are really important to keep in mind as well. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the IP strategy side of things. If you're generating IP, or even if you don't know if you're generating IP or not, we'll talk a little bit about identifying what IP you have, and then how do you think about protecting it, and different ways to protect it as well. So let me just go through that, really quickly. And I would like to relate it with, your own business strategy. One of the key things about every business is how do you stand out from your competition? You have a great business, you got some customers, but you have some new competitors coming out. How do you differentiate from that? How do you fend them off? Typically, the response is, you create something innovative. Okay, you create like something that others can't copy. Okay, this might be a new type of technical advancement, a new product, or you might be able to provide the lowest cost because what you have found is a new way of doing things which is much cost effective than others. All of those are innovations. Okay, and those are typically protected through patents, trade secrets, or copyrights. Okay, think about that as protecting your engine of your business. What's driving your business forward. Innovation are typically like either when you talk about innovations, that's what we mean, and typically they're protected through patents, trade secrets, or copyrights. Another way to stand out from your competition is to differentiate, and usually that's through your special positioning or unique way how you position yourself in the market vis-a-vis others. So this could be your branding. You might have your look and feel, your trademarks, or your designs. All of those are part of your differentiation. Okay, so think about this as protecting your face. Okay, the face of the company. How do you protect that best? That is more differentiation, and that's more related to the branding, trademarks, and designs. So you think about IP, start thinking about how are you differentiating, what are the key things that you want to focus on, and then that's helping you to identify what type of IP you want to protect first.
Sorry, I think
Now,
we actually have a question. I'm just gonna allow, I think it's Laura.
okay,
Um, can
yeah,
unmute yourself if you have a question.
yes.
Laura, did you have a question? I think your hand is up. Not sure if you had a question. Okay. Um,
Okay,
maybe not.
yeah,
I'll keep
all
going.
right, no worries. So I was just going to run through an example of IP that different companies have. And I'm going to take a couple of examples. One is non-technical, one is technical product. But think about Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola is a company that has IP everywhere. Okay, so they have patents on different aspects of their bottling plants. For example, their corks, their bottle cap itself was patented. Their vending machines, the new micro dispensers, that gives you sherry, cola, all of those are, patents owned by Coca-Cola. They have distinctive trademarks, their red color, their red-white color combinations, the Coca-Cola name, even the font with which the Coca-Cola is written. That's all trademarked by the company themselves. They have trade secrets. And again, we all know about the secret formula or the recipe that Coke is made out of. That's their trade secret. They have the designs, as I was mentioning, the bottle design itself is also a registered design patent. And they have a bunch of copyrights on their packaging materials, on their graphics, website, advertising content, and all of that. Okay, so if you think about a company like Coca-Cola, which is, you know, trying to replace things like or drinking water with their drink, they want to be everywhere, and they're using their IP strategies everywhere as well. On the other hand, you have some deeply technical companies like Apple. They have a very layered IP strategy, and basically for every single product or layer of their product, whether it's software layer, hardware, or the application layer, they are building a suite of IP on top of that. Starts off with multiple patents, on their camera systems, on their chip designs, on their core technologies, a bunch of trademarks on their logo, name, the product names, their app store, all of those. There are a bunch of trade secrets about their product roadmaps or internal algorithms or even supply chain terms. So one of the things about trade secrets is maybe you have a secret source from which you are sourcing your key materials. Those are your trade secrets as well that you ought to protect. Okay. Designs, we talked about different product shapes or their user interface. They have a bunch of design patents on that. And their software code, their icons, their marketing materials, all of those things are copyrighted. Okay. So when you think about your company's IP strategy, you know, you, you want to think about all, five different types of IP. And these are some key questions that you could potentially think about. Do you have, for example, for patents, which is more about technical innovations, do you have something new or a non-obvious aspect, a useful technical solution that gives you that competitive advantage that others do not have? And then that's more about the patentability. And then the second part is about, is it worth patenting? Because patents are one of the most expensive types of IP protections. Is it commercially important for you to justify the patent costs? Those are some questions that you want to think about while you're thinking about patents. When you talk about designs, again, does your product's design, product's appearance, or the look and feel influence the consumer's choice? How important is that? That is part of the design patent. If you think, the look and feel does not really matter, you might not, care about it as much. But if you think that's the core of your business, then you might want to think about. If you think about trade secrets, okay, what is the information that should never reach competitors? Whether it's an internal process, whether it's a secret source of supplies, whether it's an internal ingredient that you found that might be the key to your to how you're working. All of those are trade secrets, and you want to also track who has the access and what are the controls for managing these trade secrets. Then when it comes to trademarks, this is about, okay, what are some of the things like names, logos, taglines that are used by your consumers to recognize you? Those things could be worthy of a trademark. Okay. And then finally, about copyrights, what content or software would hurt if it is copied by someone else? Those things should be copyrighted. Now, the thing is, you have these five different types of IP, but not all of them are protected in the same way. Okay. For example, copyright, you get an automatic copyright on any creative expressions of art. So if you drew a painting, you have the copyright on that right away. You can register it, but you don't have to. You can still have, if you see here at the bottom, we have 2025 all rights reserved. That is an example of me putting copyrights on the material here. Okay. You don't need to register, and it is generated automatically. Similarly, for trademarks, the use of trademarks itself, gives you priority. However, you can register it as well. So, for example, a lot of companies use TM against their logo. Anyone can use that. That means that you are enforcing your trademark on that particular word mark or that particular logo. Okay, you can use TM without registering or without spending any dollar amount on any filings. But ideally, you should register your trademark. And when you do that, a lot of people use that R within a circle. That is the registration that you can use only after registering your trademark with either the Canadian Patent Office, IP Office, or the US Patent and Trademark Office. Collection of both of those things give you your brand protection. Trade secrets, again, you don't necessarily file anything. In fact, in trade secrets, you actually do not file anything. That protection comes from the secrecy measures. So making sure everything is stored inside a cyber secure vault. All your information is, you have NDAs in place, and things like these are part of your trade secrets. And finally, patents and designs, they do need formal filings and a formal, IP strategy to think about. And a lot of times, you know, people often confuse between a filing strategy versus an IP strategy. The IP strategy should include all of the five aspects of IP. Obviously, a lot of professionals want to focus on, the filings themselves, and the IP strategy ends up being just a filing strategy. Okay, but I want to spend a couple more minutes, uh, on patents specifically. There are a lot of reasons why entrepreneurs or technologists do not patent, and they think that it might not be worth patenting, and there are some good reasons for that. And often the reasons cited are: first is unpatentability of the invention. They feel that the invention that they have is not necessarily that special. It could be, I'll not be able to get the patent, so it's not worth the process. Um, you might be right in thinking that, if that's your general thought, but you'll often be surprised about what gets the nod of the patent office and what does not get, or what gets rejected. you know, and I showed you an example as well. But it's best to kind of leave that decision to an expert, and at least when you're spending that money, it's always helpful to kind of do that. Second is the technology is changing pretty fast. By the time this patent is granted within 1 or 2 years or 5 years, this technology will be obsolete. There's no point in filing. Again, that's a very valid point. Okay, but often what we see is with patents, most of the inventions are combinations of previously discovered things or previously invented stuff. So a rapid pace, with the rapid pace of technology, if you do have a patent for some of the older versions, it might actually help you in fending off competition who might, try to use what you have already done to enhance that more, or at least you might get, you might have licensing opportunities for that. Then there are costs of obtaining patents, which could range from anywhere from $5,000 to $60,000 for a single patent. And there's a cost of enforcing patents, which is much more if you want to sue someone to, protect your infringement. Those things I do agree with, okay, and those are expensive costs, but there are some pretty amazing government programs that help you subsidize that in Canada. And at the same time, you want to think about, some of these costs of patenting as your cost of, risk mitigation. But there are some good reasons to patent. It does, increase the valuation or secure investment because you're proving that you have something unique, worth, and novel. It deters patent infringement and lawsuits. Okay, it increases leverage over a partner in a negotiation, and we have seen this very often. People come to us, "Hey, I have a deal going on with with a manufacturer or with with a partner. I want to make sure that our IP is protected right before that." And that's, often, it does give you quite a bit of leverage on top of that. And finally, it increases the likelihood of an exit. And finally, it actually helps you build out monetizable assets, which a lot of startups these days do not necessarily have any assets. But an IP or a patent, a granted patent, becomes a monetizable asset. Okay. Uh, that's pretty much it on the IP side, but I want to talk a little bit about software patents and just want to leave this chart here, which is the percentage of granted US patents that are software related from 1991 to the first half of 2024. Now, in today's age, approximately 60 to 63% of total US patent grants, not just applications, but the patents which are granted, are software related. And you can see, a lot of people think that software cannot be patented. I mean, close to 60% of the patents are all software related. And the dip, by the way, you see is not because that it's dropping. It's because we don't. I mean, it takes a while for the patent data to be released, so that's often because of that. But you see a huge number of patents being software related, and especially after the 2014 rulings, of Alice Mayo, you see a lot more growth in software patents in the past decade. So I want to leave you with that. If you are building a software company, anything that software cannot be patented or should not be worthwhile, you should observe that more than, almost two-thirds of patents filed in the US are software related. Finally, I want to quickly chat about some of the, government funding for intellectual property. So in Canada, productivity is a big, topic of the day, and there's a lot of funding available for IP. In Ontario, we have this program called IP Ontario, or Intellectual Property Ontario, or IPON, that gives up to $300,000 to companies for their intellectual property needs. So there are some sectors that they've identified, but they fund pretty much everything that you can think about, from creating your IP strategy to filing for patents to even filing international patents and even licensing. We also have a federal government program called Elevate IP, which gives up to 100,000 per company, and this is coast to coast. There are different agencies that give this grant. And again, is eligible, all Canadian companies are eligible for that. And the third big program is, or popular program, is NRC IRAP's IP Assist. That gives you up to $15,000. It has some specific restrictions on what could be eligible for the grants and what could not be, but often people use that as in conjunction with these two other grants. There are some other regional grants as well, like the Innovation Asset Collective. It's a $15,000 grant for climate tech companies. There's the Alberta Innovates voucher program that is $10,000 one-time grant for some small IP project or filing. There are a lot of other provincial level grants as well, but these three are some of the biggest grants. And in today's day and age, there's almost $500,000 worth of grants between all of these programs that you can stack on each other as well. That is available to subsidize the cost of your IP. So I'll take a pause here and talk a little bit about some of the overlap between SR&ED and IP. And maybe Lauren, you want to take over and talk a little bit about how SR&ED and your SR&ED credits could be used for creation of IP.
Yeah, we'll try to go through this pretty quickly because I want to leave some time for
Yes.
questions. But in general, SR&ED and IP are very interrelated. Obviously, the work that you're doing that is often eligible for SR&ED is often the work that leads to patentable inventions, trade secrets, and copyright code or data. So there's a lot of overlap in, what SR&ED subsidize and the work that is therefore kind of eligible for IP work. So a ton of overlap there, and often companies that have SR&ED have IP and vice versa. So.
Yeah,
That's kind of what we wanted to mention there is a little bit more. I think you wanted to mention
absolutely.
about that.
And and that's definitely true. And also, like, if you have an IP strategy, you could use your SR&ED funds to prioritize those projects, right?
Mhm.
So for example, you can align your SR&ED projects with your IP roadmap, and that way your kind of entire IP strategy, your business strategy, and your SR&ED strategy, they're all kind of combined and working in sync.
Mhm.
So that's a key thing. And a lot of you know documentation that you would do for your IP would be similar to, or would be helpful for your SR&ED documentation collection as well. So that'll kind of save you some savings there as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. And finally, like, for investors and acquirers, like Lauren has mentioned earlier, you know, using SR&ED, a tax credit, to fund creation of valuable assets like, IP, it signals that there's ongoing innovation and research going on, and there's disciplined documentation within the company that kind of increases the transparency, and there's lower risk because you have an asset and there's a proof that you are using that, the funds for proper research work. So
Hmm.
that is a big sign for investors and potential acquirers of your business as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Yep. So,
Yeah,
all right,
I'll just touch
Camille.
a little bit on kind of what GrowWise does and what we do and just kind of give a bit of background. So we're a Shred consulting firm. We've built an AI-driven platform to save time and effort in the claim preparation. That entails an AI document review and project identification to maximize claims. So rather than having hours and hours of back and forth on a call with the consultant, we've allowed the system basically you just dump all of your information into the system and we pull out the pieces that are shred eligible. And we kind of say within the work you're doing, there's a little piece of each puzzle, the shred puzzle, in every document and every code and everything. So what we do is we allow just dump your information into our program and we'll pull out that puzzle and create that picture of what shred should look like within your company. So we support companies throughout the process with our AI as well as our team of experts. At every step, we say it's kind of supervised AI. So there's AI, but it also always kicks back to my team of experts, and we kind of go back and forth in that process. So we help companies in every industry. We've helped two-person startups, those all the way up to 100 plus person companies. So we've really helped, across all industries, across Canada and across company sizes. So here to be the Shred advisor that is the new age Shred advisor using AI and really simplifying that process for you folks.
Awesome. Thank you. And just to briefly talk about Innovance, so we are an end-to-end intellectual property services company. And, we're not a law firm, though we do have lawyers and patent agents on staff. But, we look at ourselves as technology company and we have a technology products, a couple of products coming out as well. But we have a team of technical experts with expertise in different subject matters. And that gives us the ability to dig into your R&D to understand what are some of the things that you're doing and identify what are some of the predictable assets. We take that, we combine that with your product strategy, with your business strategy, and build out the IP strategy for you. We do IP filings, we do prosecution, yeah, and we also help in commercialization as well. So that's just about us. I would like to open the floor for some questions at this point. And if you have any questions regarding Shred, scan the QR code on the left side. If you have something on the IP, scan the QR code on the right side. Just drop us a note. We'll be able to connect you. We work very closely with Lauren and her team. And if you get lost on which QR code to scan, we can help you out either way.